Hello, I'm Stephanie Sebbing with Quilt Addicts Anonymous. This is the video tutorial for block 2 of the Dimensions block of the month. This is our official block of the month for 2018, and I'm really excited about it because it uses these Kinkame shades. They're really beautiful, and when you cut it, this color change is all in the fabric. So all you have to do is cut your strip, and then when you cut it apart, you're going to automatically get this beautiful range of color without having to be really specific about what fabrics you choose. This just happens automatically. So today's block is really a long strip of fabric. It's going to sit in between the blocks that we made in block 1 when the final quilt is assembled at the end of the block of the month program. And if you know me, you know I really like to make 4 at a time flying geese units because there's no waste. It's really an accurate way of doing things. But for this one, because the color change happens across the width of fabric, we wouldn't be able to get this really cool effect if we did the 4 at a time flying geese. So for this quilt, we're going to be making the flying geese with the stitch and flip method. So I'm going to show you how to do that in today's video. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up my sewing machine so that my needle is in the center. And I want it in the center because we're going to be sewing on top of the line instead of sewing a scant 1/4 inch stitch like we normally do when we make triangles using any of my other patterns. So I've already pre-drawn some lines on the wrong side of my background fabric. And you can see I've just taken a line and I've drawn from point to point on that wrong side there. You can maybe see it a little bit better on this one. And I just drew it from corner to corner, and that's going to be our guide. That's what we're going to sew on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to set it so that way my corners are lining up on my edge of my rectangle. And I'm also making sure that I'm keeping it going from darkest to lightest, and the easiest way to keep track of this is to arrange them like this right after you're done cutting, so you have everything in order and you can keep it in order. So I've got my line arranged from the top, middle to the bottom right on this first one. So now when I stitch this, I'm going to line it up so that way my sewing machine needle is coming down right on that line that I drew. So now you can see my line is sewn and I've got my stitching, maybe just like a needle width to the right of where that line is. And that will help ensure that when I flip this open, we still end up with a nice rectangle. We don't really have to do any trimming. So the first thing I want to do is trim this to a 1/4 inch. These handy 6.5 inch rulers are really great for basically everything in this quilt. So if you don't have one, make sure you pick one up. All right, so I've got that saved, and I'm saving these because I'm going to make something fun and special with it at the end. All right, so now I need to press this wing out. So these little triangles are called wings, if you didn't know that. It's part of the flying geese. Okay, so we've got that pressed. So now I can take my other one, and this time we are lining it up with the line going from the center down to the bottom left. And so that way when we sew this, we're going to get our nice little flying geese unit there. So now I'm going to feed this through the sewing machine again. Go ahead and get that trimmed off and then pressed open. And now we've got a flying geese. Now if you've done this right, your flying geese point should be about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of your block because that's going to end up in the seam allowance. And your seams and your bottom corner should come right to that corner. And that'll make sure you don't lose any points when you sew these together. All right, now you need to sew the rest of your flying geese together. Again, making sure you keep those in color order as you're working. So one of the biggest challenges that quilters face when they're sewing flying geese units together is how to keep this point so that you don't lose it when you sew it together. I'm going to show you how to do that today. It's really simple. You just have to pay attention to where your needle is when you're sewing these guys together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip these guys together, and I have them arranged so that my lightest is over here and then I'm just getting darker as I go. If you're doing this at home, you may want to arrange them all in one line, but this is how I can get them all on the video screen for y'all. Alright, so I'm going to flip this together, and if you notice that if I just start sewing along this line that I can't see where my point is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over, and now I can see where the lines make a nice little X here. So what I want to do is when I'm stitching my 1/4 inch seam, if I've done everything right, it should end up 1 needle width to the right of where this X is in the stitching line. If I'm not perfectly accurate with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move my needle over so that no matter what, my needle is 1 needle width to the right of this X. I would rather fudge it a little bit and have that point be perfect than be off some and have it not work right. Alright, so if you want, you can pin these corners together and you can pin that center. I generally hate pinning, so I try to pin as little as possible, and I actually won't pin it all for this block until it's put together in the final assembly. So now I need to make sure that I change my stitch width back to a 1/4 inch stitch, because we have been sewing with the needle in the center position, and unless you have a 1/4 inch foot on your machine, you're going to need to move it to your 1/4 inch stitch setting. Okay, so what I'm doing is I've got my suppressor foot lined up with the edge of my needle, and then or the edge of my fabric, and now I'm just slowing down when I get to that point to make sure that my needle is 1 needle width to the right of that X. Alright, so we're going to grab the next 2. I'm going to flip that over, and we're going to sew along this side. So I just kind of line my corners up and make sure that this is even, the edges are even there. And I slow down as I get to that center so that I can make sure that my needle hits just 1 needle width to the right of where that thread X is. Alright, so you can see on this one I've got my thread X coming together, and I stitched my 1/4 inch seam so that way it is 1 needle width to the side of where this thread X is. And that way I haven't cut off any of this point. So when you cut off your point, that means you stitched right over it, and your point is no longer going to show when you press it open. So now we're going to press this and we can see how it turned out. Oh, that's pretty good. So if we take a little bit closer look here, you can see there's just a smidgen of the background gray solid at the top, but once that's all quilted in, you won't ever see it. It'll look like you have a perfect point. So I'm very happy with this. We're going to keep it. So I'm going to keep sewing until I've got all these lined up in a row, because we just have one big long row for block 2. So I've got one final step before we're totally done with this month's block, and that is I'm gonna starch this. There are lots of triangles in this block, and so what I found to help make them stay really flat and square was give them a little bit of spritz with Mary Ellen's Best Press. This stuff is technically a starch alternative. You can find it at Target and probably also at your local quilt shop. I like it because it doesn't flake and it doesn't leave any residue on the fabric, but it really helps your iron get everything nice and flat, but it doesn't stretch anything out. So give it a spritz, give it an iron, and you're done with this month's block. So that's it. Block 2 is actually a really long set of flying geese. We're making 4 of these for the quilt, and I just love how it gets that lovely color change, but this is all from just one width of fabric to get this. You didn't have to get all fancy with picking out just the perfect orange, yellows, and reds. You just had to cut it and keep it in order from your ombre strip from the Kinkame shades by Clothworks. They're fabulous. I love them. And I also really like this nice mist gray that we're using with it. That is made completely in the US. The cotton's grown here, it's milled here, it's dyed here. So if you like supporting American made, this is a great solid to use. If you've liked this video, make sure to subscribe. We have lots of quilting tips and tricks and tutorials, and we have tutorials to go with a lot of the Quilt Addicts Anonymous patterns. You can also visit us online at quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can see lots of free video tutorials and check out our quilting blog there. And you can go to shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. That's where you can get lots of fabulous fabrics, including the kit for dimensions and the pattern book, and lots of other great fabulous modern quilting supplies. Thanks so much for following along, and until next month, happy quilting!